Welcome back to the All Hazards Prepper Show, your go-to spot for all your disaster prep information and how to survive wild SHTF scenarios. Plus, we'll chat about the chaos of the world, throw in weather updates, and cover any topics the All Hazards Prepper has in his head this week. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform and join us on social media. Now, let's welcome your fearless leader and the brains behind the All Hazards Prepper, Blake.
Hey everyone, the All Hazards Prepper back with you with another episode. Super grateful that you have joined us back here on the All Hazards Prepper Show. Hope you've enjoyed the content we've been putting out this past few weeks. We are in severe weather season. If you're listening to this podcast, now we are in hurricane season. Hurricane season started on Saturday, or last Saturday there. So definitely, if you're going to become a prepper, if you're going to start prepping, today is the time to do it. I will, preach that, and I will keep preaching that as long as I run to this page. Now is the time to start prepping. There is no bad time to start. Today's episode it's going to be a little different. It's just going to be me talking, kind of what we started out doing this originally, and I really wanted to dive into what my field is. There's a lot of people that don't know what emergency management is. And there's so many ties that I can tie it to prepping. It's really I was writing a piece this weekend for my X Twitter page. If you're not following the X page, or if you're on Twitter, whatever you want to call it, whatever we're calling it nowadays, make sure you go follow me over there. And I feel I wrote the term. I feel like there's a lot of emergency managers out there that are preppers, but we just don't like to use that title prepper. Because whenever I first started this, I think I talked about people thought a prepper was some man and a woman in a basement hoarding a bunch of rice and beans and water and ammunition and weapons and all that stuff, and it's really not necessarily that. Yeah, I mean you could be that person, but there's a lot more of to prepping rather than that. So I really want to dive into emergency management. Kind of, I've talked about it on the first episode, how I got into the field. I think most people in the emergency management field get into it by accident. There are a few of us, kind of, I guess I could be in either boat. As I was as a volunteer firefighter beforehand, I feel like a lot of emergency managers are former firefighters, fire chiefs, police officers, EMS, EMTs, dispatchers, somewhere in that field, especially military. I've seen a lot more military guys get in, which is great. All provide different things, different mindsets, different experiences and ideas. But I kind of went into the field a little bit halfway. I was a firefighter, but also or a volunteer firefighter, but also kind of went to school for it. Once I discovered it and discovered the major. So if you don't know what emergency management is, back in the day, back in the 80s, 90s, maybe early 90s, I think really the term emergency management started coming to fruition, or they used to call it OEM, or a lot of places still call it OEM as Office of Emergency Management. Really 9/11 changed a lot of that, like it changed a lot of everything else. But a lot of people, it was the Civil Defense Agency or something like that, back in the 80s or even before then, and now it's called, we're really emergency management. There's a lot of different facets of emergency management. There's, you could go into it from, the public sector, of course, local government, state government, non-governmental, kind of like what I do, education, and higher ed, certainly. Private sector, there's terms, there's been a lot more of that. You kind of hear the term business continuity a lot within the private sector instead of emergency management, or maybe the term crisis management. And all of those kind of all relate together. They all tie together. A lot of different facets of government and private sector have emergency management. So really, as an emergency management, our job is to really collaborate and bring people together. And I really feel there's a lot of different ways I could describe it, but that's one way. I try to get people together. I try to go ahead and talk about these different points that we're going to talk about, and we're kind of related back to prepping, but it's really to make sure that we're really looking to the future We're also looking kind of behind at, our past mistakes as an organization or the government or private sector entity, and really making sure that we're dealing with what we have. And we really focus on four topics within emergency management. It's mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. If you go type of emergency management, you'll see a little those four terms with a little a cycle. It's really a cycle to emergency management. So as a prepper and as emergency management, it all starts with really preparedness. Making sure that you have those plans in place, making sure that you really think out. My wife hates it, my family hates it, but I think all the time of what's the worst thing that can happen. What keeps me up at night as an emergency manager? And that's what I'm planning for. What's my organization's worst day? And really we're then planning from that. If it's a hurricane, if it's an active shooter, if it's some sort of technological failure, if in the private sector, a lot of emergency managers or business continuity folks focus on, it's that failure of something, of their business, or that disrupts their business, and it really, it's thinking about that and then planning for it. It's getting all the stakeholders to the table and planning for it. And as a prepper, you can do that too. That's you with your family, with your stakeholders. If it's if your parents are part of live right down the road from you, they're part of your plan. If your aunt and uncle, cousins, if you got people around you, even friends, they need to be part of your plan. So you all know what you're doing together. Same thing as emergency manager. I want to make sure that every part of my organization that I'm working for is all together. We all know what happens when something, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. If this happens, we know this is what we're going to do here. Really build out from a plan that's kind of written and formalized all the way down to like checklists. So this is, me, going through a checklist. This just happened. This threshold was just met. We're going through a checklist and we're going down from that. And then it's really with the preparedness, it's training and exercises, and making sure that you are trained as, as emergency manager. I want to make sure that my staff, my people that are in that plan are trained. We've exercised that plan. We have tested that plan. We have gone back and revised. Sorry, that I just hit the mic. We have gone back and revised the plan based on what we've learned from our not failure. We don't like to call it failures. We just like to call it improvements after action. Really hot wash it. And that's what we need to do as preppers too. Once you have that plan together, once you have your preps together, which is, and that's, we'll talk about that the next point, but, your stuff together, making sure that you're testing it and exercising it, making sure you know how to use it. If your plan, if your plan is to evacuate when a hurricane's coming, making sure that you put everything that you're going to take with you in a car beforehand, so that way it all can fit in there, and that the route of wherever you're getting to. And then the next thing with preparedness is the fun stuff, I like to call it, is the preps, is the food, the water, the emergency radios, the backup generators, the resources, those physical items that you have. And in emergency management world, we play with those too. We just kind of play with them on a bigger scale. And everyone in emergency management wants the biggest, latest thing. The trucks, the trailers, the hazardous response vehicles, the new radios, the new emergency operation centers, and all of that. Maybe I'll talk about that in the response part here, but that's the stuff. And as a prepper, that's the fun stuff too. But we got to make sure that we have those plans, and then we have those resources in place, and then we're testing and training on those resources as well. The next part of emergency management, but also as a prepper, is that response. How are we taking this plan? How are we taking this resources that we have, and now we're responding to whatever we've planned for, whatever we prepare for, and all of that. A lot of people, think emergency managers are, the people that are out there, on the front lines and, doing stuff. We're not the boots on the ground. We are the ones that are in the, what we call emergency operation centers, making sure that those boots on the ground have the resources that they need, that we're coordinating, and we're making sure that, this fire chief is talking with this police chief, and we're making sure, we're having a coordinated effortless response to whatever we're going after. If we're going after, a severe weather event that's just occurred, one afternoon, knocked down a few trees, knocked out a couple, neighborhoods with power, or up to the bigger disasters where we have hurricanes, affecting large parts of our community, faulting, helping other communities if we weren't affected. So as an emergency manager, it's really for us to look at that, that bird's eye, picture, that really looking at, the big picture of things. We're not focusing on that, one little incident that's occurring during the disaster. We're focusing on that whole thing and making sure that we're supporting those on the ground. So for the response as a prepper, it's pretty simple. It's responding with the resources, with the plans that you have in place. If your plan says, we live in a coastal area and it says to evacuate, and we have a Category 4 storm coming, and on our plan it says that we can't handle a Category 4 storm, we're going to leave. That's what you're doing. That's your response to that disaster, or that hurricane, or whatever you're dealing with. It's really also it can be about property preservation. It could be, if you have a hurricane coming, have a checklist. And this is what I'm going to do before a hurricane comes. I'm going to shut off the water. I'm going to make sure that my storm drains are clear. I'm going to make sure that my generators and my saws or whatever you might need, have gas. I'm going to have extra gas in my car. Making sure that's really your response as as a prepper. But also as an emergency manager, that's my job, to making sure that I might not be going to fill up the chainsaws, but I might be making sure that someone else is going to fill up the chainsaws, and that we've gone through that checklist as an organization. So really, that's the response, and then the mass care of it too. That's the job as emergency manager. Often is to set up the shelters, making sure that we're coordinating with our shelter partners, and that as a prepper is what you need to do as well. You have a responsibility for the care of those that are in your plan. For your family, your extended family, your friends, whoever you have identified. So you need to make sure that you're taking care of them, that you either have moved to a shelter if you evacuated, or if you're bugging out or bugging in, or whatever you want to call it, or hunkering down at your home during that storm or during that disaster, making sure that you have taking care of everyone in there. So that's kind of a response part. Kind of simple, but it's a lot of people, the response is the lights and the sirens and the fun stuff, but really it's kind of simple, especially in the emergency manager's eye. And then the biggest thing, the next one is going to be recovery. As a prepper, and we're going to talk about in another episode, is that recovery is key. And that's making sure that you have, as a prepper, making sure that you have your insurance figure it out. That way you can work with your insurance agent, or if you have to go and work with FEMA or your local emergency manager, and making sure that you talk with them, and all of that. And then that's the cleanup, and making sure that you kind of get back to normal life. As an emergency manager, recovery is going to look different per jurisdiction. I was out in Wyoming. I dealt with a large wildfire. I think I've said that before. The recovery for an emergency manager takes a lot longer than the response for someone. Usually, the first responders go back home and they're like, okay, we're going to go back in here. But really, recovery is when a lot of emergency managers start working. That's working with FEMA, working with your community, setting up disaster recovery plans, really looking at what was impacted by your the disaster that affected your area, and making sure that you're kind of planning that out, working with different stakeholders, maybe different non-governmental agencies, to make sure that your citizens or those that depend on you as an emergency manager are properly recovered. It can be also debris management. A lot of times after large storms, or even wildfires or stuff like that, you got to kind of deal with that debris, deal with that housing, deal with the health and social services aspects of that, and economic relief. Certainly, if you have your economy, your local economy has been affected. So a lot of emergency managers, that's when they kind of start really working. It can take years to recover from a disaster, from a community. It can take years. I don't even know how. I mean, I know, Florence and Matthew, we're still going through recovery processes here in North Carolina for that. A lot of states that are hurricane prone, areas, they actually have separate offices that are completely separate, but do work with the state emergency management. to deal with recovery. Even counties, I've seen some large coastal counties here in North Carolina do that, that are actually just set up for recovery. That's their only job. Their job is not to do the response, the preparedness, the mitigation. Their really job, or maybe some mitigation, but really their job is to help citizens, after that disaster, because a lot of money is flowing in during that time from FEMA and everywhere else. So definitely a good point there. But as a prepper, I think the biggest thing for you as a recovery is to make sure look at your insurance, and all of that, making sure that you have a way to deal with the debris, and all of that, and making sure you have ways to remove that debris, and making sure that you have those plans in place. Going back, and your plan should kind of focus on a little bit too on recovery. Then mitigation is going to be the next term. Mitigation might look differently for a prepper or for someone that owns a house or owns a piece of property rather than as an emergency manager. So I'll talk about as a prepper first. Mitigation is really going to be fortifying and increasing your capability to withstand disasters, withstand even technological disasters, natural disasters, man-made disasters. Um, it could be as simple as installing a generator. That can be a mitigation task that you do, or it could be if if your yard or home even floods, making sure that you redo your irrigation or your drainage systems. You work maybe with a contractor to do that, or if you're handy, you do that on your own. Making sure that you kind of work out what's disaster, what's occurring, and if you lived in a home for a little while, or even if you're a new homeowner, you should know your vulnerabilities, what could happen, what could break, what could go wrong following a disaster, following whatever disaster affects your area. And you kind of need to part of the mitigation process is doing kind of a hazard vulnerability assessment. And a lot of people don't do that until after something occurs. Go and talk with your neighbors. Has my our yard flooded before? If you're a new homeowner, has the community flooded before? Has this community lost power a lot? Really looking at those, and then kind of coming up with some preparedness, some mitigation fronts to deal with that. So in emergency manager's world, mitigation is going to look different. Mitigation is really doing the same thing, but doing on a larger scale. As an emergency manager, I'm going to be looking at ways I can install generators for my shelter sites, for my key critical infrastructure. It could be making sure that I'm working with my public works to redo flooding issues in the town, stormwater drains, stormwater runoff, creating a stormwater runoff program, something of that nature. It could be as big as doing giant big FEMA projects. There's actually FEMA money out there through hazard mitigation grants to really to fortify and build up your infrastructure, improving your infrastructure. It could be also looking at the cyber world, your cyber infrastructure, putting in ways to stop hackers or something like that. Mitigation's a lot of big things, and it's also public education. As a an emergency manager, my job is to have some public education, to go out in my public to my stakeholders and really talk with them about preparedness, talk about them about kind of being a prepper. But just again, we don't use the term prepper here in the community of emergency management. We just we want people to be informed of what's happening. So that's kind of the cycle of emergency management. There's a lot of other stuff that every emergency manager is going to deal with something different. If you're working on a county or a local municipality, you're dealing with a lot of grants and budget stuff, and a lot of emergency management is funded through grants. When I was working in a county, I was tied at the hip with my grants manager, with my finance folks. Half of most of my what I was operating on, my operating budget was grant funded. And a lot of emergency managers, that's the case. And it's really a growing field. I am lucky enough to have kind of been up in growing in the field, really see the field grow. There used to be no degrees for it. There used to be certainly no master's degrees for it. Now there's master's degrees and bachelor's degrees and even PhDs in it. So there's a lot more training in it. There's a lot more, people that are that are doing it. There's a lot of people that were doing emergency management for years but didn't even realize it. The field is ever changing. We're seeing more disasters occurring today, and like I said, I'll talk about that at some point else. But we really I think emergency managers play an important part at the table whenever we're trying to really prepare for these big large disasters. We can do things that others might not really look at. We can look out outside that box and really look at some complex problems and put some solutions towards them. And we the other big thing in emergency management is just having connections. Being able to call somebody in the neighboring jurisdiction, say, "Hey, I got the problem. How are you dealing with it? Hey, I'm going to have this problem, or we're in the middle of a disaster. How are you dealing with it?" Um, it's a lot about connections. I feel like a lot of emergency managers, we do a good job of talking with each other. We're pretty friendly towards each other, and not in our silos. A lot of public safety agencies are in their silos. In emergency management, we like to break down the silos head on, and we like to put all of them together. I love nothing more that gets me more pleasure than to see the fire chief, the police chief, the EMS chief, the dispatch chief, or the director, along with your city and county officials and all those all in one room discussing something. That really brings the emergency manager some pleasure because that's what we're looking for. We're looking to break down those walls, break down those communication gaps, and really talk about how we're going to respond to something before something occurs, and really looking to the future and looking at the past as well. Doing those lessons learned and all that. So, hope this episode was a little interesting to you. I felt like it was kind of necessary. I bring up emergency management a lot because that's my field, that's my passion. It's really tied in with prepping. I think you kind of saw that today. That prepping and emergency management really go hand in hand. We don't, like I said, we don't use that term, the a prepper in emergency management. I just use the term that I'm an emergency manager. I don't go out and whenever I'm going to meet with someone professionally, say, "Oh, I'm an emergency manager," and I'm also a prepper. I think a lot of people just kind of think or know that a lot of emergency management people are preppers because we want people to be prepared because ultimately that's what's going to help us during disaster. Is if that prepared citizens going to do way more impact and help us way more in the long run than some other larger project or something like that. Because we really want people to be prepared. So hope this episode was useful to you. Keep following our content. We are getting into hurricane season. We are in the middle of severe weather season, like I said. We're at some different times as well in current events. So today is the perfect day to be prepared and to become a prepper. If you're not haven't done so so far by listening to this podcast or listening or seeing some of our videos and all of that. Hope everyone stays safe out there. The All Hazard Prepper out.